It all began in June 1985, when readers were first introduced to the occult detective John Constantine in issue number 37 of The Saga of the Swamp Thing. At first, he was a supporting character, serving as an advisor to the main hero. But that didn't stop the audience from quickly growing fond of him. Constantine stood out from most DC characters. He was a cynical anti-hero with questionable morals, often driven more by self-interest or a thirst for thrills than by any noble ideals. Many people are drawn to these kinds of bad boys. For a while, Constantine made occasional appearances in various comics until, in 1988, he finally got his own series titled Hellblazer. Interestingly, the creators originally intended to call it Hellraiser, but after the release of Clive Barker's 1987 film of the same name, they had to change the title. The comics creators never hid the fact that they based Constantine's appearance on Sting. Artists Stephen R. Bissett and John Totleben were big fans of the Police and wanted to draw a character that resembled the musician. This idea aligned perfectly with writer Alan Moore's intention to move away from the typical depiction of occultists and mediums as stern old men. He envisioned the character as more of a blue-collar figure. In 1993, when DC launched its Vertigo imprint for publishing more adult stories, Hellblazer became one of its titles. It ended up being the longest-running series under the Vertigo label. Thanks to its popularity, Constantine eventually caught the attention of filmmakers. In 1997, screenwriter Kevin Broadbent walked into a meeting with producer Lauren Donner, who would later be involved in creating all the X-Men and Deadpool films, carrying a stack of Vertigo comics. Donner approved the idea of making a film about the occult detective. At first, she considered turning the adaptation into a classic horror film in the vein of The Exorcist, but over time, the concept evolved into a more traditional Hollywood blockbuster. It's no secret that the Dream Factory has never been known for treating literary source material with much care. And back then, comic book adaptations had even less of a chance at staying faithful. The full script for Constantine was eventually written by Frank A. Capello, who, by his own admission, had no experience adapting graphic novels. Unsurprisingly, many key elements were significantly altered during the writing process. For instance, the main character became American, with a completely different backstory, and the setting shifted from England to the United States. At one point, the project even changed its title. The producers didn't want Hellblazer to be confused with either Hellraiser or Hellboy, which was already in development at the time. Later, Capello shared that he wanted the story to focus not on saving the world, but on whether John could find a way out and defeat his terminal illness. So the screenwriter did incorporate some plot elements from the comics. In particular, the film borrowed Constantine's battle with lung cancer from Dangerous Habits. Papa Midnight was taken from Original Sins. Aside from the main character and Papa Midnight, a few other elements from the source material made it into the screenplay, including the cab driver, Chaz, and the demon Ellie. However, Chaz's character was significantly altered. In the original comics, he was roughly the same age as Constantine and served as his trusted ally. In the film, however, he was made much younger and acted more like a comic relief sidekick. The filmmakers never denied that their version of Constantine looked quite different from his comic book counterpart. According to them, they never aimed to create a visually faithful adaptation. Instead, their main goal was to capture the essence of the character and his cynical worldview, and they believed they succeeded in doing so. The producers wanted Constantine to have a stylish and edgy visual tone that would appeal to a younger audience, so they looked for a director with experience in music videos and commercials. The first candidate was music video director Paul Hunter, but he didn't mesh well with the producers and was replaced by Tarsem Singh, who had just directed The Cell. Then came the search for the leading man. Among those considered were Mel Gibson and Kevin Spacey, but the role eventually went to Nicolas Cage. At that time, the plan was to begin filming in 2002. The version of the script that was ready around then was fairly similar to the final film's plot, but with a few notable differences. For example, the opening took place in Istanbul. The audience would have witnessed a large-scale prison break scene, where a prisoner accidentally discovered the Spear of Destiny during a tunnel escape from a Turkish prison. Angela Dodson's, played by Rachel Weisz, introduction was also different. She was shown chasing a criminal through a subway tunnel and killing him. But the biggest differences were in the ending. In that version, Constantine let Chaz go, then teamed up with Papa Midnight to fight off demons. Midnight was killed during a battle with Mammon. In the final scene, Constantine traveled to Africa and buried the Spear of Destiny there. Just as filming was about to begin, disaster struck. Tarsem Singhs had a major falling out with the studio. Both sides began hurling lawsuits at each other, accusing one another of breaching contractual obligations. In the end, Singh left the project, and Nicolas Cage left with him. Alan Moore, the creator of Constantine, had no involvement in the making of the film. By the time production began, the acclaimed comic book writer had grown deeply disillusioned with Hollywood. He was extremely unhappy with the quality of previous adaptations of his work, such as From Hell, and frustrated by the way producers treated his creations. As a result, he flat out refused to support the Constantine movie and even requested that his share of the royalties be given instead to the artists who had illustrated the comic. Fortunately, the producers quickly found a replacement for Singh by bringing in music video director Francis Lawrence, known for his work with Jennifer Lopez, Janet Jackson, Aerosmith, and many other top artists. Lawrence wasn't familiar with the Constantine comics, but he was intrigued by the character description and excited by the chance to make his feature film debut. Now, the team needed a new Constantine. The production delay turned out to be a blessing, as it allowed them to bring Keanu Reeves on board. He had just spent nearly a year and a half in Australia working on the Matrix sequels, which were filmed back-to-back, and was finally available. The studio liked the idea of casting Reeves in the lead role. They hoped his popularity would help launch a new long-running franchise to replace The Matrix. According to Lawrence, Reeves came to his office the very next day after returning from Australia. The director had prepared a pitch presentation, and it impressed Reeves enough to say yes to the role of Constantine. The role of Angela Dodson went to Rachel Weisz, who had previously worked with Reeves in Chain Reaction. Papa Midnight was played by Jimin Hounsou, while Chaz was portrayed by a then little-known Shia LaBeouf, recommended by none other than Will Smith. From the start, Francis Lawrence wanted Tilda Swinton for the role of Gabriel, but he doubted she'd agree to appear in a big-budget Hollywood blockbuster. And he wasn't sure the studio would go for an actress known primarily for indie films. To his surprise, Swinton said yes, and the studio didn't object. The final piece of the puzzle was Lucifer. The script didn't specify what the devil should look like. The filmmakers wanted to surprise the audience with something unique, but their initial ideas weren't exactly inspired, mostly involving a sadomasochistic look. Thankfully, Peter Stormare showed up to audition, originally for the role of Balthazar, but it quickly became clear that he would make a far better Lucifer. Stormare agreed to take on the role under one condition. He wanted full creative control over the character's appearance. The white linen suit and the black tar oozing from his feet were entirely his idea. Stormare is a master of his craft, and his portrayal of Lucifer is, without exaggeration, one of the best ever seen on screen. He's simultaneously charming and smiling, yet terrifying, exuding a palpable sense of evil, an outstanding performance. Filming on Constantine began in October 2003 in California. The creators had hoped until the last minute to keep one of the character's most iconic comic book elements, his olive trench coat, but during fittings it became clear that it didn't suit Keanu Reeves at all. They swapped it for a black one. Director Francis Lawrence also rejected the idea of dyeing Keanu's hair blonde, and there was absolutely no talk of him using a British accent. Everyone still remembered the backlash Reeves received for his awkward attempt at an English accent in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, yes.
And so, the Hollywood version of Constantine completely severed ties with his British comic book roots. The studio allocated a substantial $100 million to the production, a big budget at the time, but even that wasn't enough to bring all of the filmmakers' ideas to life. For instance, the original prologue set in Istanbul had to be scrapped due to cost and was replaced by a more budget-friendly scene in Mexico. A large chase sequence was also cut. It featured Balthazar transforming into a hellhound and pursuing the protagonists through the streets of Los Angeles. Instead, the filmmakers created a more contained scene in which Angela is pulled out of a building by demonic forces. This replacement scene used real sets, green screen, and miniatures. A scaled-down model of the office was built, as a sort of nod to The Matrix, through which a small puppet of Rachel Weisz's character was pulled. A more detailed, full-size silicone replica of Angela was also created for the scene in which she examines the body of her deceased twin sister. The Spear of Destiny shown in Constantine was previously used on the set of Hellboy. One of the most challenging aspects for the production team was designing and visualizing hell itself. Initially, it was conceived as a lifeless wasteland covered in black sludge and bones, but the creators soon realized they needed a more visually striking concept. Francis Lawrence suggested portraying hell as a kind of highway that runs through the flipped, corrupted version of our world. Visual effects supervisor Michael Fink came up with a striking idea. Hell should look like the frozen-in-time moment of a nuclear explosion, when the light flash and heat wave have already started to consume everything, but the shock wave hasn't hit yet. Lawrence loved the concept, so the animators studied hours of nuclear test footage to achieve the look. Lawrence also wanted the angels in the film to have dark raptor-like wings instead of traditional white ones. A reminder that angels are, first and foremost, God's warriors. Initially, the effects team planned to shoot close-ups of Tilda Swinton with mechanical animatronic wings created by the legendary Stan Winston studio. But that plan was later scrapped, and the wings were fully rendered using CGI. Stan Winston Studio was also responsible for other animatronics in the film. For example, they created a full-size puppet of the Scavenger Demon, which was operated on set by 6 puppeteers. The creators wanted to portray the Scavengers as a kind of automatons, soulless beings with no intelligence. They literally have no brains, driven by a single purpose: to devour anyone who ends up in hell. In Constantine, there are also flying demons called Seplavites. Their appearance was inspired by stemless wine glasses that Michael Fink once noticed in a bar, the idea being that such a glass can't be set down until the drink is finished. Similarly, the Seplavites have no legs and are doomed to fly endlessly. Unlike the Scavengers, these creatures were created entirely with CGI. Stan Winston's team also created a complex, 2-layer silicone makeup for Balthazar's exposed flesh after he comes into contact with holy water. Applying it to actor Gavin Rossdale took over 4 hours. As for Mammon, the original plan was to show him only for a few seconds in a jump scare, so a life-size model was built that could smile. But as Mammon's role grew, the character had to be animated digitally. One of the most subtle special effects in Constantine appears at the very beginning of the film. In the opening scene, the main character puts a cigarette on the table and the camera focuses on it, but in reality, it wasn't a cigarette at all. Francis Lawrence couldn't find a lens that would allow for the needed depth of focus, so they made a fake oversized cigarette, about the size of a cigar, and shot it from a greater distance. The prop designers also did a great job crafting various talismans and artifacts. Constantine's famous lighter was based on a real Zippo, but enlarged so it would look better on screen. The Holy Shotgun was initially meant to have a more handmade look, but when that didn't work visually, its design was changed to appear more sleek and stylish. The creators didn't want to include a traditional love story in the film, believing it would be unnecessary in this kind of plot. They didn't even shoot a kissing scene between Constantine and Angela, not even as a test, fearing the studio might insert it into the final cut against their will. Rachel Weisz later admitted she wouldn't have minded if Keanu Reeves had kissed her in the ending. Instead of Weisz, the romantic element in the film was meant to come from Ellie, a half-demon with whom Constantine occasionally interacted. She was played by Michelle Monaghan. However, during post-production, the entire Ellie subplot was cut, and only a single frame of Monaghan remained in the final version. On Constantine wrapped in February 2004, and post-production began. Brian Tyler was hired to compose the score, but the producers weren't completely satisfied with the result, so Klaus Badelt was brought in to help. The film was initially scheduled for release in September 2004, but it was later pushed to 2005. Constantine was shot with a PG-13 rating in mind, but the MPAA gave it an R rating due to its religious undertones. This deeply frustrated director, Francis Lawrence. In his words, had he known the film would get an adult rating, he would have gone all in with that freedom. Constantine hit theaters on February 18, 2005. It earned $33 million in the US during its opening weekend, a decent start. But then its box office quickly declined. The film ultimately grossed only $76 million domestically. The international release fared better, bringing in an additional $155 million. Taking marketing costs into account, the film at best broke even. However, back in those days, home video sales could still generate solid profits, so Constantine likely recouped its losses and eventually made some money. Still, the studio had hoped for more. Part of the problem may have been that the studio didn't know how to properly market the film. According to Francis Lawrence, by the time the project entered production, Warner Brothers had undergone a major management shakeup. The new executives inherited the film and didn't really believe in it. On one hand, this gave Lawrence the freedom to work without interference. On the other hand, it hurt the film's promotion efforts. But the main reason Constantine underperformed was the brutal beating it took from critics. They tore apart the script, the direction, and especially the performances, Keanu Reeves in particular. At the time, Reeves was not a critic favorite, and he ended up bearing the brunt of the backlash. As usual, he was accused of being wooden, and some reviewers even claimed that anyone would have been a better Constantine than Keanu. Legendary film critic Leonard Maltin gave Constantine the lowest possible rating. His colleague Roger Ebert gave it a slightly higher score, but that didn't stop him from savaging every part of the movie. Even the special effects. Ebert said the hell scenes looked like they were designed during a hangover. He later included Constantine in his list of most hated films. Regular audiences responded a bit more positively. However, Constantine didn't win much popular love upon release, partly due to fans of the original comics, who disliked the changes made to the main character. Was Constantine truly deserving of the reception it got back then? Probably not. The fan backlash was understandable, but it's important to remember that the film introduced many people to the occult detective comics in the first place. Part of the reason it struggled was because, at the time of its release, many critics viewed Francis Lawrence's film solely through the lens of The Matrix, dismissing it as a failed religious knockoff of the Wachowskis' work. It seemed like Constantine was destined to fade into obscurity, but that never happened. Over the years, public opinion slowly began to shift, and the film developed a dedicated fan base. It didn't spark a Blade Runner-style re-evaluation, where critics rewrote their reviews and labeled it an underrated masterpiece. But nearly 2 decades later, it's clear that Constantine wasn't just another forgettable blockbuster. Today, the film stands out among comic book adaptations thanks to its distinct atmosphere and mythology. And let's face it, religious-themed blockbusters are rare, which means Constantine has very little direct competition. This shift in attitude is reflected not only in the film's gradually rising IMDb score, but also in renewed talks of a sequel. Francis Lawrence has repeatedly confirmed that he wants to return to the world of Constantine, and this time, fully embrace the R rating. Keanu Reeves has also said he's willing to reprise the role. In 2022, a sequel to Constantine was officially announced, with Akiva Goldsman attached as the screenwriter. Since then, however, the project has been declared dead more than once. And yet, the Constantine sequel somehow survived the wave of cancellations led by Warner Brothers, Discovery CEO David Zaslav, the leadership change that brought James Gunn to the head of DC Studios, and even the 2023 Hollywood strike. Of course, none of this guarantees that the sequel will actually see the light of day. Hollywood is full of abandoned follow-ups that got stuck in development hell, which would be especially ironic in Constantine's case. But honestly, a happy ending here would be well-deserved. If Constantine 2 does eventually make it to the big screen, it'll be something of a miracle that the main character of the first film desperately needed.